Good morning, campers, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program version 0.25. This is the start of episode 3, and it starts with some interesting stuff. First, I'm going to show you what mods we are currently running. As you can see in the background, the planet Kerbal has a lovely layer of clouds provided by the Environmental Visual Enhancements mod. That is our big one that you notice most readily. And then as far as parts go, we're going to jump into a sandbox save real quick so I can show you everything we've added. Oh, right. So, as you can see, as far as command pods go, nothing new. That's because the other mods we have added are in the science and utility sections. Especially science is the big one. There's a whole bunch of new scientific instruments. We got those from oh, I had that written down. Where did I put that? That is from a mod called D-Magic Orbital Science, and that came with a bunch of neat parts that fit into another mod, so we went ahead and added that one too. That's the Universal Storage mod. That's all these neat little wedge-shaped items. That's part of a system that someone made, where you get these octo-cores. That's the one for the 2.5 meter parts. You also have the quad core for the 2 meter parts. And you can bolt on these modular wedge-shaped bays to these parts. They're very neat. This one's just a basic cargo bay bit here, but you also have stuff like there's a fuel cell, which is based on the ones used in the Apollo spacecraft. That's going to that actually introduces 3 new resources to the game: oxygen, hydrogen, and water. That uses oxygen and hydrogen, produces water, and also produces electricity for your landers. Very neat one there. And you can you also have the electrolyzer, which can take the water you produce from your fuel cell and turn that back into hydrogen and oxygen. So that's a good one for a space station, so you can convert stuff back, but that takes a lot more power than the fuel cell can produce, so it's not a one-to-one reaction. You'll want to put this on something that either has a lot of solar panels or a lot of RTGs. You also have things like a small fuel tank, monoprop, hydrogen, oxygen and water for the various components. And then you also have this. This is a box full of snacks. Snacks in this case are a life support utility. Kerbals will randomly eat snacks from this over the course of 6 hours. Usually about 1 snack per 6 hours. Certain Kerbals will take more than one. Sometimes you just get really bad luck and they take a lot of snacks in a short period. But if you run out of snacks when the Kerbal goes to eat one, you lose reputation. So you want to keep them well stocked with snacks. You are punished if you don't. All of the command pods come with a lot of snacks, so you only really have to worry about this on long-term missions. But it is something to pay attention to. And it makes you care a little bit more about keeping your Kerbals fed. It's a really nice, it's a very on-theme addition for life support in this game. I really hope the developers take notice of that. I love the way it's executed, and it doesn't kill your Kerbals, which is delightful, especially considering we're playing in hard mode. As far as the new science experiments go, we've got the magnetometer boom, there's a telescope, a multispectral imaging platform, RPWS antenna, soil moisture sensor, solar particle collectors, anomalous signal detector, the XKCD, an Exo Kerbal core drill, love the reference in the title for that one, and a surface ablation laser. A lot of good rover stuff here, and just really cool science experiments. A lot of those have universal storage versions as well. And then we do have another mod on top of that. We've added a whole bunch of space station parts that we're probably not going to get to until late in our series, but you can send these up and generate a lot of science experiments in low Kerbal orbit. You can move these out to, this module here is excellent to move out to the moon. It's ginormous, so it takes a big rocket to get this thing into orbit. That lets you process surface samples in orbit and send them back to Kerbal for full value. There we go. Not even planning to launch this, I'm still being very careful about how I put this on here. But this will let you process your surface samples, send them back to Kerbal without having to send your ships back every time. Nice rewarding thing for launching something massive into orbit. Good addition for a lunar space station or something similar. You also have a science lab and a zoology bay. These set you up with different experiments. The zoology bay also comes with a new resource called Kerbal, which is needed by the zoology bay to produce science. Science for the space station parts produced from combining Eurekas and quarks and Kerbal in various different ways. Eureka is produced by the Thinker Science Lab, while the quarks are produced by the Cyclotron, which is even bigger than the Spectrometron. This is basically a particle accelerator that you can fling up into orbit. Again, going to take a lot to get one of these up, so that'll probably be pretty late game for us. Not sure yet. I haven't actually gotten to really play with many of the parts aside from the universal storage things, but I have started designing a station I'd like to build. If we get there, we'll get there, but of course we are limited by budget and our career mode and science, so a lot of these parts we will have to unlock that were available early on. What else did these come with? You also see these come with a even more basic docking port that you can unlock early in the tech tree. It just lets you start building a station early. It's big, it's unwieldy, it's got a lot of mass, and you can't transfer fuel through this, so not really sure I'm going to be using that. We might just wait until we unlock a lot of space station stuff before we start building any of these. But we shall see. And also the universal storage mod comes with these delightful safe decouplers, which are decouplers that do not go in your staging profile. So you have to stage these manually. That's a nice little touch that I am quite fond of. They don't use explosive bolts, so it's a nice gentle separation. Very good for upper stages, and especially to keep your capsule from being jettisoned when you're on orbit and accidentally hit the spacebar. Hey guys, Future Azuri here. Actually, it turns out these decouplers don't do anything yet. They're just placeholder parts. The guys who make the mod are still working out the kinks with those. Hopefully they'll work in the future, but if you do download this, don't stick them on your ships, they'll be stuck together. Anyway, back to regularly scheduled Kerbals. Anyway, moving on to our first flight. You see we're unlocking some of those mod parts that we've added to the game. We've got a decent amount of money, but we're going to need to launch one of our design again, and we're going to need to go somewhere that rocket can actually handle. In this case, we are going to be souping up the rocket a tiny bit and going for Minmus. So we're unlocking some parts that might be useful for that, a couple of D-Magic parts, one or two new science instruments, mostly a lot of universal storage stuff. That power cell in particular caught my eye, and I want to put that on our lander for the Minmus visit, so we might be able to land on the dark side if we have to. Anyway, grabbing the contracts for Minmus now, because you don't want to go to Minmus and not get paid for it, you know? Minmus actually much easier to land on than the moon, and you usually get paid more for it. So, very good early objective when you're not quite able to build a really, really safe, reliable moon rocket just yet. Gonna go ahead and design the rocket. You'll notice we put a probe core on it because we have to pick up Bill from orbit. Can't leave him up there now that we got the snacks mod installed, or he's just going to cost us tons and tons of reputation the longer he sits up there. Since he has no snacks because he was launched before that mod came out. Oh, well, before I installed it anyway. So we're going to try and squeeze a few of the universal storage science stuff on here. Turns out they're actually kind of expensive, so we're going to cut down that number by about half. Get a nice looking service module built. Try and get the budget down just a little bit more. Finally give up. We're just going to take a couple more contracts to finish, to get our funds up to the point where we can launch this rocket. Kick the Kerbal out of the driver's seat. Yep, and I've forgotten Bob is sitting there trying to go. It's like, no. Can't launch this with Bob. Kick the Kerbal out of the driver's seat. Kick the Kerbal out of the driver's seat. Oh, right, I forgot to add the probe core back on. And lots and lots of batteries so we don't run out of power while we're on the dark side of the planet, just in case we don't get that power power cell turned on early enough. No Kerbal in the driver's seat, and going ahead and going into launch, we need to go get Bill from orbit. Solid rocket boosters giving us a nice, powerful launch off the pad. Nothing you haven't seen before. Just refreshing my memory so I know which contracts we're going to be able to grab while we're up there. Again, we don't have a Kerbal on board, so we're controlling all this from the probe core on the nose. Looks a little ungainly, and there's no parachutes on board, so we're going to have to land under power, but that shouldn't really be too much of an issue. These upper stages tend to come back with a whole bunch of fuel from Minmus. Uh-oh. As you can see, we've had a small issue here. The solid rocket boosters knocked out a fuel tank on the first stage as they split apart, so we're going to just go ahead and stage. And we don't have reverting in this hard mode, so we're going to try and get this upper stage into orbit anyway. At the very least, it can serve as a rescue vessel, though we've obviously written Minmus off at this point. So now our only objective is to get Bill and get him back down to the ground. Or at the very least, get him in the capsule so he can feast on delicious, delicious snacks. Luckily, plenty of Delta V in this rocket. It's basically just a it's basically the same version we got to orbit with early in the series, just instead of the 3 solid rocket boosters we had previously, we had that whole first stage that fell apart when we tried to separate the boosters. Getting up into orbit now, rolling the craft because I'm stupid like that, even though there's no Kerbal inside, so G-forces don't matter. Not that they matter if there is a Kerbal inside, but I like to act like they do. Adjusting our maneuver node for getting into orbit itself. Really glad I put the batteries on here now, since we're going straight into the dark side from our orbital burn. If you hear some unusual things in the audio for the game, I left my microphone hot when I was recording this. It's watching a couple of videos on Twitch, so I didn't want to have those in the background, so I thought I had my mic muted while I was recording. Turns out I didn't, so if you hear anything odd, that's what that is. Anyway, going to rendezvous with Bill now. You can see I try and fast forward through the boring maneuver node bits. Once they're nice and close together, we're just going to hop back into the ship. And we only have to get within 2.5 kilometers, and then Bill can do the rest. He has plenty of RCS fuel. Adjusting our encounter now. Just want to get that down nice and low so we can park next to Bill and make it pretty easy for him. But we also don't want to use too much fuel because remember, we do have to land back down under our own power. And we used up a ton of our fuel just getting into orbit. Nice encounter there, fast forwarding around. Going to kill our relative velocities once we're close and then just switch to Bill and maneuver him over. There we are, drifting ever so slightly towards Bill, and switching over, closing the gap with his with his RCS thrusters. You see, zooming in nice and close on there because he doesn't have a HUD, so you kind of have to eyeball how you're approaching the other spacecraft. You want to cancel out the movement left and right. You want to be looking as close over the Kerbal shoulder as possible so you can get an idea of how you're moving relative to your target. Generally much easier to control when you're nice and near a space station or something, but once you're just trying to once you're floating free in space like this, it can be a little tough to get your bearings. And there's the ship now. Bill safe and sound, just gonna climb aboard and start chowing down on all those delicious snacks. He's got enough for an entire trip to Minmus and back, so Lord knows he's going to have plenty to last him until his orbital journey is finished. Got a nice long stretch of time over this continent coming up, so we might just go ahead and go for a re-entry here. Doing a little bit of science just because, you know, gotta get something out of this trip. And we're going for the re-entry. You can see we're in the atmosphere now. Tried to burn as little fuel as possible to get this, so we're staying nice and high, just going to come back down after the burn. Do a good bit of aero braking. I think actually it's going to take us another orbit to get down. Yeah, that aero brake was not quite enough. So once we get around to our apoapsis, we're going to trim that up just a tad so we actually re-enter on the next pass. Or fast forward it by accident and do it around here. We do want to make sure we're coming down over land. You don't want to be trying to splash down on your rocket engine because you won't be able to rely on the landing legs to slow you down. They've got a pretty high impact tolerance, but that doesn't really matter much when you're hitting the water. The engine bell is still going to explode. Dropping us back into the atmosphere now. Looks like this is going to be our re-entry here. Yes, very nice. You can see our periapsis disappearing. It is now a ballistic trajectory back down to the ground. The lovely city lights of Kerbal now visible. No actual cities, but they have city lights, which is the important part of that, I believe. Unfortunately, it looks like we're going to come down over water anyway, so we didn't quite do that as we intended. Getting our heating effects now. Doing a little bit more science. Bill, ever vigilant about that sort of thing. Don't have too much fuel, so we're going to try and wait till the last minute to start burning. Hoping the air resistance will do most of the work for us. Here we go. Uh-oh. I think we did that a little bit too soon. Our fuel is running out. Kill the engine. Hope we're going to have enough to kill our velocity once we're closer to the surface. 900 meters. 800. 700. Uh-oh. Gaining speed very fast. Engine back up on full, just 100 meters off the surface, and out of fuel, slide down. And we've lost Bill. Certainly all of Kerbal kind reeling from the loss of its second astronaut in as many weeks here in the launch of our new space program. But we are not going to let that deter us. We are going to check on our design and relaunch this in a Minmus mission. We've got Bob at the helm this time. No major changes to the rocket design, certainly no changes to the booster separation stage, so we're going to keep a very close eye on that when it comes up. Pretty sure we'll be alright as long as we cut the main engines before we separate the boosters, let them fall away, and then light things back up again. We will improve that design with Separatrons at some point in the future, however, just to ensure we don't have any more accidents. Good, coming up on booster separation here soon. There we are. Main engine off. Booster separation, main engine back on, and we are golden. No damage, and we are heading back up into the outer reaches of Kerbal's atmosphere. This first stage, very, very powerful. This is one of my go-to rocket designs. Pretty much every save file with Kerbal Space Program, I wind up just making something similar to this. It is perfect for Minmus missions, and a fairly cheap rocket to boot for your contract needs. You can even design some robo-moon landers with this rocket design. Got just enough fuel to get there and land, not enough to come back. So, good for robo-landers, bad for Kerbals. However, Minmus, it has more than enough Delta V to get there and back again, so that is where we are headed. Starting to lose our control here. The atmosphere is getting kind of thin, and our only major control of the with the first stage of the rocket is the aerodynamic fins, which are surprisingly less useful when there's less air. Luckily, there is a decently powerful reaction wheel in the command pod, but did have to struggle to get that thing turned over for this part of the maneuver here. Here we are, stage separation. Upper stage is going to get us into orbit here, and most of the way out to Minmus. Ideally, you want to leave it on a crash course for Minmus, but a highly eccentric orbit is just fine in this case. We're not going to leave much space junk up here in the future, so chances of us encountering this again are pretty slim. Kind of hard to avoid in the early stages of the game, but avoid it we shall try. Unfortunately, this one can't quite be avoided. We are going to leave the upper stage in a highly elliptical Kerbal orbit. Speaking of Kerbal orbit, we have achieved Kerbal orbit. Our insertion maneuver very successful, and our timing excellent as well. We're going to be able to hit a Minmus encounter without having to change our inclination. Always good when it hits one of the ascending or descending nodes. Saves you quite a bit of delta V when you're heading out there. Making our Minmus burn now. We're about to run out of fuel in the first stage, or sorry, in the second stage. Separating that here. It was almost enough to get us there. So close. But we are going to finish the job with the lander engine. And there's our encounter. Pretty much spot on. We're going to be able to trim that up a bit once we're closer to Minmus. Fast forwarding out there. There you can see that little ball of ice coming up now. Tweaking our orbit a little to bring it nice and close to the surface so we can just go straight into a circular orbit. Do a bit of high Minmus science while we're out there. Bob accidentally launching himself away from the ship there. And again. Strange things tend to happen when Kerbals exit their command pods, but we're going to ignore that. The universal storage mod making this lander look particularly sleek. I really love having the scientific instruments in flush with the body of the rocket. It's very aesthetically pleasing, so that's a mod that I'm really glad I have now. Again, that's the D-Magic Science mod, and that includes universal storage versions of all of the a lot of the instruments that are included with that, as well as most of your stock instruments. You get universal storage versions of those as well. So definitely worth the investment. It doesn't take up much memory footprint. The textures are pretty basic. As mods go, it's about as minimal as you can get. And of course, the miniaturized parts are fairly well balanced. They are more expensive than their more massive brethren, and still fairly high mass to boot. You've got to be careful about how you arrange them on the pod, or else you might off your balance a little bit. Doing our low Minmus science now. Closing up our science bay doors. Another thing I really enjoy about that is you can close the doors without having to map that to an action group. Doing as much science as possible since this is the first time we've been out to Minmus. Lots and lots of EVA science to do. Of course, I don't have any transmitters on this, so we do have to get this guy back to the surface of Kerbal in one piece. Luckily, we do have a parachute this time, so we really just have to get close. More acrobatics as we exit the command pod. And we are not going to land on this first pass. We really didn't get a good pass over any of Minmus's flats, which is good first target for a landing. You don't really want to risk landing in the highlands with a basic lander like this, especially not one that's top heavy, because they tend to be not very flat. And as you'll see here shortly, we are coming up on our landing attempt, and even landing on the nice flat frozen lakes of Minmus's greater flats. We have a little bit of trouble on set down, nothing too major, but you will see that coming up. A little unnerving being this close to the surface and still using the orbital camera, but I do have some more science to do before we set down. The camera will reorient itself once we start cutting our speed. And here we go, making our burn. Camera has flipped itself around. Luckily, Minmus has pretty minimal gravity, so we just have to monitor our speed and make sure we slow down enough before we touch down that we don't break anything. But we're going to have plenty of fuel to set down and get back home again. And we're going to land nice and close to those hills, so we're going to have plenty of biomes we can visit here. Well, 2, but still, that's plenty. Hitting 2 biomes on your first Min-Miss mission is well above par for the course. Bob not looking the least bit nervous, despite the fact that he is the 3rd Kerbal to have to go up on one of these missions. This will be marking the first time in any of my save files that Bob was actually the first person to go somewhere, actually. So, Bob's probably pretty happy about that, assuming he can remember the old save files. I tend to wipe my saves every time there's an update released, so I guess this is kind of an alternate reality Bob, where he is the important one instead of Jeb. After Jeb's tragic demise in the parachuting accident. Alright, got our final landing burn going now. Shadow visible, just coming down. We're going to try and set this down nice and gently. Don't want to burn up too much of our fuel. I think I'm being a little bit too conservative here anyway. We certainly have fuel to burn, and I'm not quite burning enough of it, but we don't want to start going back up is the important part here. And touchdown, a little bit of a bounce, but our reaction wheels are able to keep us upright. Could have been better, but could have been a whole lot worse. Still got the moon on the horizon there. Lovely image. And we're going to just go straight into doing our Min-Miss science. We want to head for home as soon as possible now that we have a life support mod going. As you can see, haven't burned into our snack supply too deeply yet. Luckily, Bob, not one of the more ravenous Kerbals. I've heard Jebediah can really tear through them, but luckily he's not going to be an issue for us on this save file. And despite his acrobatics leaving the command pods earlier in the mission, he manages to alight onto the surface rather gracefully. Quick check of our contracts, make sure there's no new Min-Miss contracts have popped up since the launch. You always want to do that, make sure that before you place the flag, just in case you can get a whole bunch of free money for setting the flag once you're already there. And moment of truth. And of course Bob turns around and places the flag in such a way that I didn't want him to. But for once it is indeed readable. I prefer the default Kerbal Space Program flag. I believe we called that Min-Miss Prime, and the plaque, I believe, reads, "For once, Bob was somewhere first." Finishing up our science missions here now that the public relations stuff is out of the way. There will be a video at the end of the series, hopefully, that will just show off all the flags we've planted through the series, read off all the various different plaques. So if you miss one during this, don't worry, it will be coming up again. And I kind of don't really want to make too much of a fanfare as we place them. I like just coming up with something off the top of my head and then reading it later and laughing at myself for being stupid. So it works out pretty well for me in most of those situations. Got a little bit of science from the slopes over there, heading back to the lander. Bob not missing a chance for another very graceful landing here. Back to real time. Kill your speed, and a gentle step back onto the ground. Bob is really getting the hang of this whole jetpack thing, if not his EVA handling. Zero G, he could use a little bit of work, but he's pretty good at handling things on Min-Miss. I think he might be our go-to guy for a Min-Miss station and reusable lander eventually. Back into the command pod now. Stow our science bays. Not that we have to worry about anything falling out, but again, it's really nice for the aesthetics. Still more than 3/4 of our fuel left, and we are ready to burn for home. The moon has rotated us into a good position. We can just pretty much go straight into a return burn. Lighting our engines again. Lighting our engines again. Yes? Yes? Come on. Engines. Bob, you can leave. There he goes. And turning over, heading straight for... I believe that's... actually... No, I think that's Kerbal. Of course, the thing I tend to do on leaving Minmus is I burn far too hard and wind up in a very high orbit, but we're going to go straight for a return burn, so it doesn't really matter what kind of orbit we wind up in here at Minmus. We're not going to go through the whole orbit, so we don't really need to worry about crashing into that mountain that our periapsis is still in. Bringing us around to the inside, the Kerbal-facing half of the moon. Making our burn. Just need to tweak things a little so that we're not going for too steep a re-entry. We want it to be nice and shallow so that we have plenty of time to slow down before we get near the ground. And of course we might want to go, we might want to not land on this particular orbit depending on what's below us. Ideally we want to go for a ground landing, and as you see, it looks like we're going to get just that. Our re-entry maneuver is nice and high over one of the bigger continents. Heating effects happening now. Plenty of fuel to slow ourselves down. I do believe we did apply some thruster to make sure we were coming down on this orbit. No? Okay, so I guess we just got a direct re-entry then. Could have been a little dangerous if we hadn't been coming down over the continent, but it worked out for us in the long run. I might reinstall the trajectories mod, but probably not. I've gotten okay at eyeballing where I'm coming down. It would be nice, but again, it tended to be useful mainly in situations I was already going to be okay with. I'm going to miss it when we start doing aerobraking on other planets, however, that's for sure. Passing through the cloud layer now, our parachute has deployed, at least partially. Full deployment. Settling down a little fast, but we've got plenty of fuel, so we're going to be able to slow ourselves down. Probably what's actually making us come down so fast anyway. More than the tank's still more than half full. So that's adding a bit more mass than we're used to when we come back from anywhere with this particular upper stage. And a nice gentle touchdown. We are back on the surface, and that will conclude episode 3. Thank you so much for watching. Oh, but wait. We do have something else we need to take care of first. Returning to the Space Center, Bob has one more solemn duty to perform. Continuing our line of memorial flags in honor of Kerbals who gave their lives, Bob once more places his flag pointing in the wrong direction. However, that will not deter us from leaving a lovely memorial plaque. Rest in peace, Bill Kerman. He was very briefly lost in space, only to meet his end when the rescue craft ran out of fuel before it hit the ground and forgot to pack a parachute. Bob, you could have been better at placing this flag, but you have performed your solemn duty well. Bill, you will be missed. Rest in peace, Bill Kerman, and hopefully this will be the last flag we have to place in this particular series.